Good evening and welcome to Carrow Road, where I feel we've seen probably a Dean Smith's Norwich City performance in the extreme. Norwich City were convincing for most of the first half, really, and I think we went into half time saying that was one of the best performances we've seen from Norwich this season. Then the second half happened, an enormous collapse from this Norwich City side. Middlesbrough came back and they've lost 2-1 to really send fans into a pretty large spell without any games. Obviously 4 weeks for the Qatar World Cup, where they won't be able to watch Norwich City and they will be stewing over a defeat which leaves them in 6th in the Championship. The gap could widen to those top 2 promotion places they crave, with Burnley playing Blackburn tomorrow at 12:30, and any Norwich fans that are worried, I think, are totally justified. Now, it's probably fair to touch on that first half, where they achieved a lot of the things they wanted to achieve. Dean Smith felt that his side pressed very well, and I agree with him. I think almost all the elements were there, really, especially leading up to the first goal, which was scored midway through the first half by Josh Sargent. He'll be delighted with that, obviously going into that World Cup as Norwich City's only player playing in Qatar. But after that, they sort of seemed to maybe regress a little bit, but I think looking at it as a good performance, which is probably fair to do. They're in the top 6 and they did a lot of the things right and the things they wanted to do. You could easily defend them by saying, oh, well, they were just calming the game down. There were a lot of periods, actually, where Middlesbrough, I thought, were pretty impressive, and Norwich did well to quieten those down. Isaac Hayden is a player who I think worries fans quite a lot by going down injured, especially given what they had to endure for the first few weeks when Norwich were without a real true defensive midfielder. But he likes to go down in the middle of spells of ascendancy from opposition, and I'm not accusing him of anything. It may well be very lucky, but it worked certainly in the first half, and that seemed to be what the performance was about after that first goal, which was very well crafted. It was a ball Gabriel Sara had tried to slip through for Tamer Pukki. It was deflected into Kenny McLean's path, and he got the pass perfect for Sargent, who then finished really, really well. And after that, they just sort of put the brakes on, and you could explain it away by saying they're winning the game, no need to go chasing it. But I thought it was interesting that, having just spoken to Josh Sargent about his feelings on the game, he felt they probably could have gone for a second a little bit more, and they could have been slightly more proactive, and those were problems that got even worse in the second half. And if you thought that last 20 minutes of the first half was holding on, this took it to another level. Now, Middlesbrough found it pretty easy to play. I thought after probably 5 minutes in the ascendancy, the other side of the break, Norwich were flat. They didn't really create. They didn't look dynamic at all. They were characterised maybe by a lack of pace, and the only person that seemed to want to make things happen really was Max Aarons. And I did this verdict, obviously it's not my regular position, but I did it for the Cardiff game, and it's so strange to me now hearing so many of the parallels that I said in that game. And we're looking back at that now as almost a ridiculously poor example of Norwich City's performances. But how many times this season can we look at it and say, you can't expect every team to be successful for 90 minutes, but how many games are we looking at and saying there wasn't even the desire to do it, there wasn't even the drive, and they rely on Max Aarons, a right back, so often to get at the box and try and make things happen, and not even he could rescue Norwich in the second half. They conceded 2 pretty poor goals. First from a sort of, it was a great goal to be fair, but you feel defensively maybe Isaac Hayden should have filled in a lot of the gaps that there were. I think Johnny Howson won a header to set things up and get them going, and then it's a great acrobatic strike from McGree. Chris Gorham, I've just spoken to, was doing the commentary with Jeremy Goss, and he said it's one of those similar to the sort of Bayern Munich strike, and it was a scissor kick. I'm not sure I would put it up alongside that. Certainly not with an audience of Norwich City fans, but it was a great strike. There were certainly problems with it. And then the second goal is really, really poor defensively on the left side. Now, Sam McCallum didn't have a great game, but he certainly offers different things to Dimitris Giannoulis, and I thought that was spelled out. He offers you, in my opinion, more defensive security. It's not necessarily his game. He's not a sort of Sam Byram where he's characterised by solidity, but I thought he certainly wouldn't have produced the moment that Dimitris Giannoulis did for that second goal, where he jumps in trying to win the ball. It's not great defending from Arno Hernandez, who's playing as a left winger at the time either. He jumps in, tries to win it so early, and he's beaten, and it leaves Jones and Akpom with plenty of space to just one pass, slide across the box, tap in for Crooks, who I think it was his first touch, and he went wheeling off. Middlesbrough have won the game, and I don't think anybody could really challenge the legitimacy of that. I was going to say not for want of trying, but maybe it is not necessarily the hard work and the running around, but the courageousness, the desire to want to make things happen, want to make those Hollywood passes and those balls through and try and force the ball into the box just wasn't there for me. And that's something I think Norwich have missed without Marcelino Núñez. It was a good performance against Rotherham, and I thought they were measured when they needed to be measured, and that led them to success. But here at home in front of a Norwich City crowd that's used to good football and teams that are courageous and try and attack, especially when they're facing the Barclay End, aren't going to be happy with passing the ball sideways and sort of accepting that you're 1-0 up, so just keep the game ticking over. And it felt like holding on. It felt like holding on when Dean Smith made his first change after 62 minutes, took off one of his strikers, and he said after the game that Tamer Pukki was feeling ill and that he asked to come off, and that was why. But it almost felt symbolic of what Norwich were doing. He could have brought on Jordan Hugill at that time, as he did in the 83rd minute for Josh Sargent. He could have brought on Jordan Hugill and continued the 4-4-2 diamond system that Norwich set up with, but he didn't. He went with Arno Hernandez, tried to go with that player that you almost go for when you want an out, when you want to break out of dominance from the opposition team, and he almost accepted that Middlesbrough were going to have the best of the game from then on. And I'm not here to just bash Dean Smith, because I think he's a good coach, and that may be a controversial opinion amongst Norwich City fans at the moment. I think the decisions at times can be questioned, and the mentality, because these Norwich fans, as I said, are used to courageousness and going for it and idealism, basically. And Dean Smith is the opposite of that. He's a pragmatist. He wants to do the best thing to succeed in any given game. And when you put all of your chips on that, you have to win and you have to be successful. And we're losing at home to a Middlesbrough side that came into the game 17th in the Championship. It certainly doesn't satisfy those aims. And when you don't play the sort of football that these fans want, you don't show the desire and the hunger and the passion to try and create something that these fans are used to and desperate for, and then you lose the game, they have absolutely nothing to cling on to. And what's made it even worse for Dean Smith this week, and what probably inspired the enormous and loud boos that we heard, especially from the Barclay End in that on the full-time whistle, what's inspired that, I think, is that there's nothing to grip onto. They've got 4 weeks now. And what do they look back on this game and talk about? A great Josh Sargent finish? I don't think there's too many Norwich fans now going to the pub talking about the game saying, oh, but it was a brilliant finish from Josh Sargent, wasn't it? Tucked it into the corner really nicely. I think they're probably talking about where this team is going and the fact that a couple of years ago it was outdated that they had a top 26 mentality. They're now, I believe, 26th in the English football pyramid, and any results from other teams that go against them, any teams that leapfrog them, well, probably from now, any defeats in the next 2 or 3 games, and they slip out of that top 26. We all agreed was outdated, a year or so ago, longer than a year ago. And that really is worrying. When Norwich are struggling to perform in the Premier League and they're struggling to play the football that satisfies fans in the Premier League, it's almost understandable because of the way that the football pyramid is and because of the type of club that Norwich City are trying to be, a club that is progressive and tries to find clever ways, outside the box ways of being successful. When a club does it like that doesn't have particularly huge amounts of money, obviously aside from Mark Attanasio and what impact that might have, but the last time they were in the Premier League, he wasn't there. And when a club struggles in the Premier League and struggles to produce the football that these fans want in the Premier League, totally legitimate. However, we've seen time after time that Norwich are one of the biggest clubs in this league. They're one of the most successful clubs in the history of this league, and they've massively struggled to get going. And the time really is running out. You look at it and you go, start of the season, 10 games, get to 10 games, and we'll see what Norwich are, and we'll see how they are. Get to 10 games, and it's not quite there, but you can see the signs of it, and you're like, 15 games, 20 games, and we're now after 21 games looking at it and saying, have Norwich produced a good 90-minute performance yet? And I think the answer, unfortunately, at the moment is no. Dean Smith has reiterated, as I mentioned earlier, that you can't expect a team to be good for 90 minutes solidly, but you certainly don't expect them to fall asleep. You know, they're playing at home against Middlesbrough, and this is a club that expects to win the championship and wants to win the championship and has that ambition. And you can't, when they go 1-0 up against Middlesbrough, they can't lose that game. They haven't had a red card. They haven't had any seriously significant defensive players come off injured when they were 1-0 up. They had Tamer Pukki come off, but he wasn't particularly impressive throughout his 62 minutes. There's no real excuse other than they just fell asleep and they were just not proactive enough. And I thought Josh Sargent summed it up perfectly well there. So, you know, it's the same thing. It's repeating myself. And, you know, it's difficult to come up with new things to say about this Norwich City side. Decent first half, but it means nothing when you fall asleep and you don't have that desire to be proactive and go and make things happen. And I feel like that malaise is a feeling setting over the whole of Carrow Road and over the whole of Norwich City Football Club at the moment, and that's seriously worrying, I think, from a Norwich City fan's point of view. So let's see what Dean Smith and his group can produce the other side of this break. Obviously, they've got now a week actually off, and then they're off to Tampa Bay to do some training, and Dean Smith's been keen to assert that isn't a break. Players' families will be going with them, and obviously warm weather and everything they expect, but there will be a lot of hard work, says Dean Smith. He came from a long break in the lockdown period and produced a highly more successful Aston Villa side than he had previously in the Premier League. Maybe that's something to hang on to, but if you're a Norwich fan, you're certainly not looking at the positives at the moment. And you know, I think you can totally understand those worries. So yeah, that's all I've got to say on today. Really feels like same old, and I wish I could tell you something different, and I wish we could talk about varying things, but I think probably most of you would agree that it's starting to feel really stale and it's starting to feel quite worrying. Maybe they need a break, and maybe they'll come from it and they'll be much the better for it. But we're certainly a way away from being able to confirm that that's true. Thank you for joining me. However, I know probably one of the last things you want to do right now is listen to more Norwich City content and join in with more of that. But you know, obviously we're here to give our as truthful verdicts as we possibly can and analyse it and try and break down why things are going wrong, as well as just telling you that things are going wrong. So, you know, thanks for joining me for this. All the rest of our content and our analysis is on the Pink and Plus app. Connor's pointers this week. Fan reaction will be on there later. Galleries, all sorts of things. So, you know, get across there if you're still hungry for some Norwich City content. I understand if you're not, but hopefully you are, because we're not going anywhere, even though Norwich City are. And we'll be keeping you up to date with all the latest Norwich City news and views on the Pink and Plus app. So keep it locked to there. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you soon.